This special look features the misperceptions, deceptions, and lies from NBCUniversal's longtime head, Bob Wright. Wright wrote a self-righteous book called The Right Stuff as a note to his own legacy. As Autism Awareness Month has come, let your fellow stable autistic minifig newsie finally do a special look on Wright's shortcomings in destroying what was a decent broadcast network. NBC was bipolar in ratings and was poorly managed by the Radio Corporation of America. RCA was bought by General Electric in 1985, with the deal closing in 1986. RCA missed out in the computer business and got out of the mainframes by the 1960s. General Electric's intent of buying RCA was to only keep the NBC television network, and within a couple of years disposed all of the other assets once owned by RCA.
Over by General Electric, which bought NBC's parent RCA. GE is being accused of financing this $6 billion deal with money garnered by legally avoiding federal income tax during several recent years.
GE treated the unit as if it was broken and felt that the network should be treated like any other unit of GE, like jet engines, light bulbs, etc. Strange quality in business practices known as Six Sigma was applied to the network, where risk was not tolerated and creativity was supported elsewhere in the industry, even in cable in its early years. Synergies, the normal practice for profit business, is to pool resources that may result in cost reduction or value that was encouraged at NBC, either on an engineer or a journalistic level.
From Colorado's news leader, this is 9 News at
When
10.
talking to a child from either the 1980s or 90s, you would tell the kid that the TV network would be a formation of 200 individual TV stations, and the strength of both the financial and business purposes would be in number of affiliates and the profits that they made. FCC ownership, even if there wasn't any restrictions with a country so large like the United States, the network couldn't own all 200. They've struggled with just 10 before the Comcast acquisition. GE and NBC felt everything should be controlled from New York. According to Wright's memoir, conservative practice to risk was used.
NBC, the first network to bring radio and television into the
Step
American
one of
home.
trying to do a cable strategy. After NBC finally
The first
dumped
to
the
broadcast
radio
live in
business,
stereo.
and not just in a little fanfare. Oh
The
wait,
leader
am
in
I
news,
wrong?
sport,
Straight business decision on the part of GE to sell off this station.
Yeah, it's a business decision.
Executives here say it's not been as profitable as other divisions. Today, despite attempts at a graduation party, the mood was clearly that of a wake. As boxes moved out, someone threw a noose out the window.
Okay, after NBC treated the radio stations like some other business unit, lay off some history and replace the old space with what?
And as for the studios, those wonderful studios with all those memories, they will be filled with computers.
Wow. Sure is an end of an era.
Sure
Well, we wish
is.
them all well.
Who's really autistic here? NBC's grandiose view of NBC was to become a cable-like network, and NBC allegedly had proof. The 6 O&Os: New York, Los Angeles, Chicago, Miami, Colorado, and DC were losing money.
Wright strategically saw that as an offensive mechanism. He wanted to get into the cable business, and remembering this was 1989 in the relative infancy of cable, and defensively he did it in order to protect the possible erosion of audiences at the core businesses, that being the NBC television network and the owned and operated stations. And as it turned out, his vision was absolutely accurate.
And what about the affiliates? Why is NBC talking about a major part of the network without them? What was their defense tactic? Step 2. While waiting for the affiliates to cave in, create a cable network. Focus on business during the day and talk at night. Then do this creation within 4 months. And be sure to pull a fast one amongst the naive affiliates, assuming they will all cave in. CBS and ABC invested in networks but didn't own them outright or manage them. The experiment for NBC was called CNBC, known as publicly as the Consumer News and Business Channel, internally known as Cable NBC or NBC on Cable, using the clunky lead affiliates less panic about a big three network going into cable.
We looked at business news as an opportunity. FNN existed, but had fallen in financial hard times. We tried initially to partner with FNN, but they didn't want to do that. So we elected to start on our own.
Affiliates won the battle in the form of a concession that CNBC would not use the peacock logo, but still felt that CNBC was a threat financially, as they feared that cable would cannibalize the affiliates' revenue. A couple years later, NBC bought FNN in 1991 on a technicality in federal bankruptcy court after an intense bidding war.
I hope this works. That's what's going through my mind.
Bob Wright was forced being right that CNBC could not fail. CNBC lacked the homes and ratings at the time. The belief that acquiring FNN for $135 million in 1991
CNBC FNN Daytime. I'm Dean Shepard. Sue Herrera is off today. Here's what's happening at this hour.
You're connected to MSNBC.
Nearly 6 years later, the affiliates were yet again under attack by mismanagement at 30 Rock. Wright stood behind Bill Gates in a meeting in a building introducing MSNBC, an internet digital venture with Microsoft and NBC. Microsoft would produce the content on the digital side, while NBC News would handle the cable network. This new network would replace America's Talking, a talk show focused on current events, with a right-of-center bias ran by Roger Ailes, who ran CNBC for a period of time. On the same day of the announcement of MSNBC, Roger Ailes was not invited to the event. A show F-bombed on his closed-circuit feed in his Fort Lee, New Jersey office. After feeling like he was being betrayed, he jumped the Hudson to help launch the Fox News channel 4 months after the launch of MSNBC.
Good morning. Welcome to Fox News Channel.
This is Fox News Now, all the news you need in 15 minutes. Good morning, everyone. I'm Allison.
On the next special look, after bullying the affiliates for CNBC, Bob Wright weaponizes it right back. Next time on Special Look.
Yeah, it's a business decision.
Today on Special Look, after Bob Wright and NBC created enemies,
that all the affiliates were paid to carry the programming. That deal went away years ago.
Bob Wright weaponized back at them. It was the pay to play.
He retained that deal.
Local news, followed by an all-new Tonight Show right here on...
As I stated, NBC was the least tolerated network of preemptions imposed by local affiliates, mostly because NBC paid local stations to be affiliates annually. When I took over as president of NBC in September 1986, I didn't just inherit a well-known TV network, I also inherited some 200 TV stations in the NBC family, all with wildly different agendas and personalities. In 1987, NBC bought WTVJ in Miami without notifying WSVN, the incumbent NBC affiliate at the time, while WTVJ was the longtime CBS affiliate. NBC would, over the next year and a half, as they allowed the affiliation to end as scheduled, would indirectly brand the station as an NBC-owned station, such as News 4 South Florida, or the title of the morning news, such as News 4 Today, despite running CBS programs. Speaking about CBS, they had bought the Fox affiliate because the Tiffany network didn't want to deal with Sunbeam either. And this time, it was perfect for Sunbeam because the Fox network only ran shows on weekends, which enabled them to launch the Channel 7 News format, the Flash and Trash newscasts, which used about 7 or so hours a day, which for the late 1980s standards was very low. And the way things happened, Eddie Anson got the Fox network.
Live from WFOR-TV.
On September 10th, 1995, nearly 8 years after buying WTVJ, NBC would get screwed over in Miami. Channel 4 would move to Channel 6. The ratings showed, and if you like the sucking Miami Dolphins and had rabbit ears, you were out of luck until CBS got the AFC rights and moved to Channel 4 via WFOR in the 1998 NFL season.
So the waiting and speculation are over. The Washington Post company has reached an agreement with NBCUniversal to acquire WTVJ.
Yeah, this is the big story of the day. PostNewsweek Stations Incorporated is a Washington Post company and will continue to operate WTVJ as an NBC affiliate.
Alan Frank, President and Chief Executive Officer of PostNewsweek Stations, said, quote, "We are pleased to be able to reach an agreement to purchase such a historic station as WTVJ, the first TV station to broadcast in Florida."
It's a lot of history.
In the case of WTVJ, NBC had even flirted the idea of selling the station to former holdings of the Washington Post Newsweek Group, which owned WPLG, the ABC affiliate. This would be one of the first duopolies of owning two Big Three affiliates, not a Big Three plus Indy or CW or Fox. This could have been a disaster. The financial crisis of 2008 made NBC get cold feet and get stuck with WTVJ. By 2012, started to be competitive again, nearly 25 years after buying the station in the first place.
Top story tonight, a local teacher leaves the Broward jail in tears. He was arrested yesterday.
NBC, they wanted to be different and disrespected viewers' awareness. They treated the stations like children, and Wright was acting like the meanie daddy, giving affiliates about 3 hours of local programming outside the 5 and 6 and 11 o'clock news. So NBC loaded the lineup. Affiliate relationships were ruled by law of simpler times. Only one station in one city would be allowed to carry the programming of that network. The stations would carry all their network programs. Their local newscasts and afternoon syndicated shows especially benefited from the lead-in and lead-out audiences of popular network programs. For many, network cash compensation constituted as much as 1/3 of their annual revenue. Bob Wright had admitted in his own book about what could be argued as one of the most invasive affiliation agreements. A stark reversal of traditional network affiliate relations. Randy Falco and I told young broadcasting executives that the NBC would cease paying KRON $7.5 million in annual cash compensation to televise its network schedule. Young would have to pay NBC $10 million every year to offset increased program costs. KRON would be rebranded as NBC4, reduce 3/4 of its voluntary preemption of the NBC's core primetime series airing nightly 7 to 10 p.m. and give the network access to its new digital capabilities. Young flatly rejected our take it or leave it proposition. The next day he tried calling our bluff, defiantly announcing that he would sever the station's 50-year ties to NBC and become an independent broadcaster. This means hits like ER, Friends, The Today Show, The Tonight Show, and NBC Nightly News would need a new San Francisco home where KRON's NBC's pact expired in the beginning of 2002. On February 10th, 2000, we shocked Young and the entire broadcasting world with the plans to move the NBC affiliation to KNTV at the end of KRON's contract term. It got into the feathers in late 2002 following the sale to NBC. However, the station looked like an owned and operated station for its first year.
Granite Broadcasting agreed to pay NBC $362 million to air NBC shows. That is the first time in history a local station would pay a network for its programs. Traditionally, it's always been the other way around.
Many of us at NBC have yearned to own a station in this marketplace. We're talking about the fifth largest area in the country. And for us, that's a tremendous...
NBC was so insistent that its stations threw the feathers in the face of the viewers in local news that they would watch their network programming. NBC didn't care. Refusing to use the peacock could be a ding against your affiliation. KRON's branding was the Channel 4 logo shaped like the Golden Gate Bridge. NBC also manipulated smaller market stations to use the NBC channel number for branding. Call signs were not recommended to be the primary brand. Remember, we are not talking about a station like WMAQ and NBC5. We're talking about markets in the middle of nowhere. Wright ironically used WXYZ-TV to use the example of calls in the wrong stuff. The irony was he didn't use WNBC-TV because not only WXYZ is owned by Scripps, if he only had a smart enough or better ghostwriter. We face similar challenges with Autism Speaks, but success is less clear.
The diagnosis. He lost his speech, he lost his potty training, and he was diagnosed with autism, I would say 7 months too late.
Quickly. I work faster than pediatric AIDS, cancer, and diabetes combined. And if you are happily married, I will make sure that your marriage fails. Your money.
That would be preferable to having to put her in one of these schools, and it's only because of Lauren, the fact that I have another child that I probably didn't do it.
In the early 2000s, Bob Wright became a granddaddy. As you can see in this clip, you gotta groom them kids young to succeed in the NBC patriarchy. Wright's grandson showed signs of something unusual for children under 3 years old. Wright and his daughter Katie's world went to almost morbid.
Fell apart.
In 2005, Bob and his wife Suzanne founded Autism Speaks. The founding was heavily promoted to Bob's company, NBCUniversal. The Universal name came to be after merging with Vivendi's sale of Universal Studios the previous summer. The news operations at NBC, from The Today Show to Nightly to CNBC to MSNBC, put on nearly an hour's worth of content across those networks in a week in February 2005. Prior to the founding of Autism Speaks, the media's coverage has been very little and very scarce.
She writes, "My son is 14 years
When
old
misinformation such as the infamous MMR vaccine alleging damage to children in Britain, causing the disgraced doctor Andrew Wakefield to lose his license and his study in the Lancet 4 years before. But Autism Speaks didn't shine any light. Despite their signature Light It Up Blue campaign, it instilled fear in a new millennia of what was historically a developmental disorder. During this time in 2005, autism cases were 1 in 250 people. And for many people who were near the age of 20, had walked in the darkness and entered into adulthood in the dark. However, the focus was on literal children under the age of 8, born around the time when the MMR vaccine was allegedly causing autistic conditions. And to this day, many of the awareness is on children despite a change of narrative. Autism Speaks was not even a year in when they entered into controversy. In 2006, Autism Speaks released a short film called Autism Every Day. It was produced by Jim Watkins, a well-known face at WPIX's 10 p.m. newscast in New York. Conflicting sources cite his wife, Lauren Terry, as a co-producer. The couple had a child with a severe case of autism. For all intents and purposes, it was believed that Watkins was the producer, and given his broadcast experience from WTVF in Nashville to Evening Magazine at Boston's WXYZ-TV to WNBC Channel 4 and to WPIX in New York, you would think there would be some line of what should be in a film. In one cut, a woman named Allison Singer said something really alarming.
People have no idea what it's like to have a child with autism. Completely overcrowded and 12 kids and one teacher, and the kids don't make progress. But I remember that was a very scary moment for me when I realized I had sat in the car for about 15 minutes and actually contemplated putting Jody in the car and driving off the George Washington Bridge, and that would be perfect.
To the point, the producer makes an audible gasp.
That would be preferable.
The girl that she was contemplating doing a double murder-suicide running in the background, right in the camera frame.
In front of her autistic daughter, she admits thinking of driving them both off of a bridge.
It is very important to emphasize that this is the George Washington Bridge, the largest thoroughfare on the East Coast, a bridge that you can't even just drive off, even with a big scary truck. And not even that, the dramatic idealization would be even more lethal. From the inbound to New Jersey, known as the upper deck, to the bottom of the Hudson River is roughly 500 feet, as the largest depth of the Hudson River enters into the Atlantic Basin. Many advocates ignore this as a fact, just calling it a bridge and withholding the infamous producer, who is a respected, solid broadcast journalist with a sterling reputation. At the same time, WPIX's parent company, Tribune, was bought by Sam Zell, who had a crass reputation, and so
what I would call journalistic arrogance of deciding that puppies don't count. I don't know anything about puppies.
And so the standards on WPIX's air was not well enforced. He will be back in a moment. Welcome back. Bob Wright can't be wrong, huh? We continue on. Autism Speaks is a rare case of a nonprofit entity having to gone through mergers and acquisitions. One of those M&A deals was Cure Autism Now. This is where Autism Speaks got into pseudoscience.
I am autism. I'm visible in your children, but if I can help it, I am invisible to you until it's too late. I know where you live, and guess what? I live there too. I hover around all of you. I know no color barrier, no religion, no morality, no current. Quickly. I work faster than pediatric AIDS, cancer, and diabetes combined. And if you are happily married, I will make sure that your marriage fails. Your money will fall into my hands, and I will bankrupt you for my own self-gain.
On one of the many controversial, poorly messaged campaigns where I Am Autism, circa 2008.
Of course, until it's their child.
And to autism I say,
I am a father,
a mother, a grandparent,
brother,
a sister.
We will spend every waking hour trying to weaken you.
We don't need sleep because we will not rest until you do.
Family can be
riding towards you, and you can push me off this horse time and time again.
The messaging of this was to focus if the child's autistic condition could talk. The campaign was very negative, writing off any children's hopes. Suzanne Wright was the looser nut in the single blue puzzle piece. Suzanne was extremely passive-aggressive.
Definitely trying to take the stigma away.
virtually by the awareness campaign that we've had. I mean, in the 65-year history of the Ad Council, they have never taken on a single disease campaign. So when we got autism, nobody was saying the A word. But the idea that autism is now on the radar for everybody, we're going to spread the word around the world. A diagnosis.
He lost his speech, he lost his potty training, and he was diagnosed with autism, I would say 7 months too late.
Decided to make it our mission to find out what was causing this epidemic.
Autism epidemic is and how it's taking our children into the darkness. I mean, here in your school system, I think, Nina, you've identified 15 with autism, and those 15 children have at least in their orbit another 20 people that are affected by autism. I know how it's affected my entire family.
In 2013, Suzanne couldn't help herself to compare foreign worlds to autism. It made viruses like AIDS or cancer to what the Wrights were trying to compare it to.
Awareness is out there, and I think once awareness gets filtered down through our society at all levels, the stigma takes away. You can well remember the stigma that we had with AIDS. I mean, everybody was in the closet about AIDS. Everybody was afraid to have, I think...
Suzanne Wright, throughout this time, continued to attack autism as if it was a death sentence. Autism Speaks had very little autism representation, and while one verbal and higher functioning individual was on the board, he actually left following Suzanne Wright's infamous 2013 vitriol.
And if you know autism, you know we are looking at a monumental health crisis, and we have no national plan. What I described above is really just the beginning. In the next 10 years, 500,000 Americans with autism will be growing up and out of the system, which means they will no longer qualify for the services they rely on every day. And what about their parents? How much can we ask them to handle? How long will it be before the exhaustion makes them ill? How long before they break? This is a national emergency. We need a national autism plan now. We are heading to Washington with a call for action on a national plan now.
But it wasn't atypical for Autism Speaks to have guest bloggers whining and crying about how their autistic sibling was the worst thing that ever happened to them, to the point where they would put it black on white. I'm very lucky. Matthew knows I have no trouble making friends, and he knows I have a girlfriend. He knows I'm more independent than he is, and I go to college. Overall, Autism Speaks has not been helpful at all. Financial support for families and individuals who have autism, not even autistic individuals themselves, for the most part, only come from the 4% of the annual revenue. The vast majority of it goes to so-called research. Remember Allison Singer, the woman who wanted to drive off the GWB? Well, she was part of the Autism Speaks science, but left to disagreements. Autism Speaks partnered with many for-profit entities, from Google's cloud to do a database to search a missing gene. Notice that the I to emphasize something missing. To Home Depot to sell those silly blue lights to spread awareness of a morbid developmental delay. Overall, Autism Speaks in a cozy relationship with NBCU continued for many years. People that were most loyal to Bob Wright, mostly from CNBC, would wear the single blue puzzle piece as if it was some loyalty ring. Remember, Bob won more hearts to his special interest, the NBC cable division, not the affiliates of the NBC television network. Bob Wright left NBCU in 2006, he helped build the kill switch for the flagship NBC network. Jeff Zucker was working the ranks at NBC going as far back as 1988, acting as an executive producer for the Summer Olympics. Over the years, through his only talent of brown-nosing, he was able to go up the ranks to being the executive producer of their morning news show, rebranding it from Today to the Today Show. But by the time the NBCUniversal deal closed in 2004, he became the executive, cutting as many of those glory days of the must-see TV era shows to lower quality sitcoms and mockumentary-style productions. taking advantage of DV camcorders over expensive ARRI cameras. Between the end of 2004 and the 2005 seasons, most of the must-see TV shows came to a natural end, logging high in the ratings, while shows like ER didn't end well. It got suckered into newer, cheaper shows with poorer lead-ins. Hollywood was well aware of Zucker's cost-cutting and implementing the Bob Wright playbook once and for all.
We asked Conan to move his show back to 12:05.
It was people like Zucker who bragged about rather having NBC be in first place in profits over ratings. It was all about money. Things got inherently worse by the financial crisis. NBC was cutting to the bone, and by 2009 it was unclear whether NBC would cease to exist the way the network had been for over 60 years. Jay Leno, who agreed to his last contract with NBC in 2004, got cold feet by the end of the contract, pushing away Conan O'Brien, who was supposed to be the successor to his 11:35 show. NBC decided to experiment with network TV and put a variety show of sorts with Jay to 10 o'clock. Allison's Sunbeam Broadcasting, for the first time in a long time, played hardball with NBC, threatening to preempt Leno's show by airing local news for the entire time slot, with no other way to see the show. As a result, Sunbeam's management was right. Ratings on Leno's 10 p.m. show was really lousy. Regardless, NBC had threatened to pull the affiliation away from WHGH in 2009 to use a Merrimack, New Hampshire-based Telemundo-owned signal to air NBC programs. By the turn of the decade, the announcement of NBCU to be sold by General Electric to Comcast was in full force, with conditional agreements with the FCC starting with GE's 49% disposal began, with GE selling the rest of the asset within a few years. NBC's longtime threat to get into Boston had gone on for years. Nearly a year after Sunbeam bought WXYZ-TV in Boston from David Mugar's New England Television, Allison and Company got really lucky. When competing station WXYZ-TV was going to switch to a CBS affiliation long before Westinghouse actually bought CBS, the options for Allison's Sunbeam was interesting. Would they partner with Fox and let their two lone stations on the extreme ends of I-95 running Fox programs, or would he play with a Peacock once more? The latter option was the only reasonable one.
The fact that he could sell, he claims that he's been lowballed. He's had a really sweetheart deal with NBC for a long time. It used to be that all the affiliates were paid to carry the programming. That deal went away years ago. And when he switched over in '95, remember the switch between channels 4 and 7? He retained that deal at Channel 7. He still gets paid about $4 million a year to carry NBC programming. So you know that that's part of the source of rancor here with NBC.
NBC desperately tried everything in their power to use their own feathers instead. One attempt was to acquire outlet broadcasting. How? Much like in New Hampshire, NBC was going to move the NBC 10 Providence just a tad bit north of the state line and cover most of the Boston and point south. For southern New Hampshire, they would be in the same boat as many people in the South Coast today. People who had lived in the southern part of Rhode Island would most likely be without relevant local news. The WJAR experiment failed, and NBC disposed most of the former outlet stations under the leadership of Zucker in 2006. Threats of WHGH losing the Peacocks was speculated for years in media columns to beat the press, but such threats had to be taken seriously in 2016 when the announcement that NBC would use the same UHF Channel 60 that had no ties to Merrimack, New Hampshire for almost 2 decades following the merger with Comcast gave NBC the regional cable news channel NECN. This allowed NBC to actually have a news operation that, if they got their way in 2009, would be an extreme task to complete. A side note to this story, I wrote most of the story when the NBC WHGH saga was going on in 2016 with nearly a 4,000-word blog post of what NBC did for nearly 30 years before. Bob Wright, in the spring of 2016, published his memoir, and this book showed his true colors: a blue soul, a very cold-hearted man who only cared about his legacy and money and lack of content, controlling local affiliates, deflecting concerns from affiliates, then blaming the affiliates for everything. A lot of the practices he did at NBCUs almost identically applied to Autism Speaks. The man has some form of dark triad traits, and clearly had or still has ableist tendencies as of this writing of all types of people with autism, including your humble mini fake news.